Hi, Lester, Wishu Engineer. My 6-year-old son likes playing Terraria. I do too. I'll be playing some of the footage of me playing Terraria in the background, but please don't look too closely because it's been several months since I've played, and I don't actually think I've played since well before COVID was a thing, and I died a lot. My boy likes me to collect Moonlord weapons and armor for him, so post-Moonlord weapons and armor, so that he can run around and explore his pre-hard mode world fully strapped and not having to worry about monsters posing any kind of real threat to him. He really enjoyed fighting the Eye of Cthulhu, which of course is one of the first Terraria boss monsters that a player encounters, and is also possibly the most iconic boss. In fact, he liked the Eye of Cthulhu so much that he wanted me to make him one. He asked me to make him a model of the Eye of Cthulhu second stage, and so this is what I came up with. I made it out of a polystyrene ball, paper clips, masking tape, kebab sticks, EVA foam and hot glue. A little later, I gave his character an Eye of Cthulhu yo-yo, one of the in-game yo-yos that I used as weapons in Terraria. I think you can get it as a drop from Mothron during the Eclipse event, post hard mode. He loved playing with the yo-yo in-game, and not satisfied with just having a model of the Eye of Cthulhu and an in-game yo-yo, he decided to make himself an Eye of Cthulhu yo-yo out of another polystyrene ball and some string. I don't actually have a photograph of it, but it was actually quite well made, and he drew the Eye of Cthulhu on it as well, which was really quite cute. So I decided that I would make him a working Eye of Cthulhu yo-yo. Don't ask me why. I just like doing strange things, I suppose. At my son's age, I also used to pretend to fight bad guys and monsters with pretend weapons, that the kind of weapons that a little boy might imagine that he'd be able to wield his toys as various types of weapons. In fact, at that age, at my son's age, yo-yos were quite popular and actually going through a bit of a craze. That was during the been a long time now, late 70s, early 80s. I used to play with those old Coke, Fanta and Sprite yo-yos that you used to be able to get at that time. If I was honest, I'd have to confess that I would pretend to fight bad guys with my yo-yo from time to time. The coolest yo-yo I ever had at that time was a glow-in-the-dark one. There was a bit of a myth circulating at the time amongst the boys at school that the yo-yo was actually a weapon used by some obscure jungle tribe somewhere or other. Of course, that's more than likely nonsense. The yo-yo appears to have always been nothing more than a kid's toy. However, I decided to make my boy's Eye of Cthulhu yo-yo into the closest thing that I could to a combat yo-yo, because I would have loved to have had something like that at his age. Although yo-yos might never have been used as legitimate weapons, there are actually many instances in both the East and the West of weapons being used that consisted of a weight attached to the end of a length of cord. Examples include the Chinese martial arts weapons known as rope darts, and in particular, meteor hammers. Additional examples include the Western self-defense weapon known as the slungshot or monkey's fist, and you can find them commonly being sold as self-defense weapons today, and you can even find plans for making your own out of paracord and large steel ball bearings. The meteor hammer, though, is actually a lot heavier, or was typically a lot heavier than my proposed combat yo-yo, and had a much longer cord or a chain attached to it. Although it's nonetheless, it's very similar, and it gave a good foundation from which I could extrapolate my design for the Eye of Cthulhu combat yo-yo. So I started with a stainless steel bolt as an axle with two 4mm thick G10 fiberglass discs on either side. This would form the basic structure of the yo-yo. I decided to cast the form of the Eye of Cthulhu sides out of a special composite that I'd been experimenting with for my R&D company, a ballistic resistant composite. So yes, I decided to make it bulletproof, or bullet resistant to be more correct. I modeled the Eye of Cthulhu side first out of polymer clay. And after baking the clay and spraying it with a mold release agent, I made a silicon mold of the eye. I could then use this to cast the ballistic composite directly onto the G10 fiberglass discs. Because I had only made one mold, I had to wait each time for the ballistic composite to set, which was a bit of a pain. But I ended up making two full Eye of Cthulhu yo-yos, one for combat testing and one for my son, and two test pieces. One test piece as a ballistic test piece, and one to test the paint and finish that I was going to use. The final weight of the Eye of Cthulhu yo-yo was approximately 175 grams. This was quite light compared to a meteor hammer, which can apparently weigh several kilograms, but significantly heavier than a standard yo-yo. I then painted the yo-yos with a base coat of house paint, followed by the actual paint scheme, which I did in simple artist's acrylic paints, because these were the only paints that I had access to. I then finished off the yo-yo with a coat of clear varnish to seal in the acrylic paint and to give it a slimy, wet eyeball look. This seemed to work really well and was quite hard wearing as a finish. I have since smacked the concrete floor with this yo-yo several times, and apart from a couple of scuff marks, the paint finish is still fine. I was initially concerned that the paint would just wear off. I then took the ballistic test piece that I had constructed up a hill and introduced it to my boomstick. This is what the test looked like. Welcome to our campsite on the top of our hill. I'm going to have a go at shooting one half of the Eye of Cthulhu combat yo-yo, and we'll see what happens.
It's gone. Okay. Where'd it go?
It's in pieces.
Okay. There's a piece.
But the backing plate has not been penetrated.
Wow.
So I think the whole system combined with the backing plate, I can say, is bulletproof, at least for the 12 gauge shotgun shell I just used to test it with, which was a 9 pellet buckshot. Anyway, interesting. So it was kind of bulletproof-ish. Because this was going to be a combat yo-yo, I decided that the string should be made out of paracord because it would not constrict around the wielder's hands and fingers as severely as a thinner string would. In addition, the string would be longer than a conventional yo-yo, which would allow it to be used very much like a traditional meteor hammer would, with one end held or looped around the offhand. Paracord is also quite strong, making the Eye of Cthulhu yo-yo string far more durable than a standard string. Although I could have used something like a Kevlar string, which would have been a lot thinner, but then, as I said, you might have had issues with it constricting around the user's hands during use. However, this meant, because I used paracord, it meant that the yo-yo would need to have a much wider gap between the two halves in order to accommodate the thicker paracord string. The paracord string and the weight of the Eye of Cthulhu yo-yo also introduced other problems. Because the paracord was stiffer than conventional yo-yo string, it did not roll up on the axle quite as easily. This, combined with the weight of the yo-yo, made it impossible to use a standard friction action to get the spinning yo-yo to roll back up onto its string. I tried a number of different friction settings, but could not find a good sweet spot that would allow me to get the yo-yo to spin after throwing it and then jerk it back up the string. I think there's probably a way of doing it. I just wasn't able to solve the problem in time for this video, so I had to opt for a yo-yo that did not spin. Perhaps I'll revisit the problem at a later stage. So it kind of works as a yo-yo. Not the best. It doesn't look the best because of what I've had to do in terms of the yo-yo axle and the way the string is attached. In this case, a piece of paracord. So that may require further engineering to allow it to spin. But as I've mentioned elsewhere in my video, the concept of spinning for a yo-yo of this mass, it's very difficult to actually make that work in terms of the mass, the flexibility of the string, and the thickness of the cord. In Terraria, however, the Eye of Cthulhu does not adhere to the laws of physics. The wielder can spin it out and it remains spinning at the end of its string, essentially indefinitely, and the wielder can cause it to move around the screen while deployed merely by moving the mouse cursor around. Because I don't have access to physics-defying magic powers, I could not cause my yo-yo to do that. What is interesting is that in the game, the Eye of Cthulhu yo-yo appears to cause damage to enemies by virtue of its spinning. In other words, the apparently infinite amount of spin that the yo-yo possesses is transferred to enemies when it touches them, causing damage. While the seemingly infinite rotational inertia of the yo-yo displayed in the game is an impossibility, the idea of damaging something by touching it with a rotating object is not so far-fetched. Anyone who remembers watching Robot Wars will remember the terror and mayhem caused by the robots that were equipped with rotating disc weapons. Depending on various factors such as mass, inertial, constant, radius, and rotational speed, there is the potential to store large amounts of rotational kinetic energy in a rotating object, which can then be transferred to a target when touching it. In the case of the Eye of Cthulhu yo-yo, the amount of rotational kinetic energy that it would be possible to impart to it based on various factors was negligible compared to the kinetic energy I could impart by swinging and throwing the yo-yo like a meteor hammer. This was another reason that I decided to opt for a no-spin yo-yo. I performed a few tests against the load cell to test the impact force that I could achieve with the Eye of Cthulhu yo-yo, and this is what the tests looked like. So that went up to 678. Okay, so that went up to just under 1,000. So typically I could generate between 600 and 700 newtons of impact force with a linear forward throw, whereas I could generate close to 1,000 newtons of impact force with a full swing. This is a comparative graph showing the maximum linear forward throw and full swing impact force waveforms. Now these numbers may not seem so great compared to the other weapons that I've tested on this channel, like baseball bats and flutes, and when compared with my bare hand striking. However, consideration should be given to the fact that the yo-yo takes up far less room than other weapons and offers greater range than bare hand strikes and many other weapons. In addition, the impact forces generated by the yo-yo are concentrated over a very small surface area due to the yo-yo's shape. This could make the yo-yo an effective weapon in well-trained hands. I decided to have a go with the yo-yo doing some freestyle bag work. Now I have to confess that I do not train with flexible weapons of this nature, so this is pretty much just my instinctive take on its use. Someone who specializes in training meteor hammer or rope dart would more than likely be able to do a much better job. But for what it's worth, this is what my freestyle attempt looked like. Just a little something that came up during the testing of the yo-yo and also actually during the little segment that I filmed against the bag. But when the yo-yo wraps around something, it actually has the potential to hook on just because of the shape of the yo-yo. If you have a look there, you'll see how that's actually occurring, which is quite interesting and something that might actually lend itself to some kind of combat applications like trips and captures. So it was usable as a weapon, sort of. I would see it more as a weapon that could be used to disrupt and distract and act as a sort of an accompaniment to bare hand fighting. However, if your opponent or opponents were to accidentally provide a good target momentarily and you were able to seize that opportunity with a full swing strike, it could be quite devastating and could potentially end the fight. Well, I had a lot of fun building the Eye of Cthulhu yo-yo, and I'm sure that when my boy is old and tall enough to use it easily, he should have a lot of fun playing with it and bragging about it to his friends. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time. Cheers.